Hey, what's going on, folks? It's CJ here. We gotta talk about Morbius. This is a review of the movie, but there's definitely going to be spoilers in this because honestly, I'm gonna make this quick. But there's definitely a lot to say about Morbius and also just Sony, period, in terms of what they're doing right now with their cinematic universe. Um, so for a while since when Sony decided they were going to do their own cinematic universe that's separate from the MCU because of their rights issues with Spider-Man, I was very trepidatious of what that was going to look like. Ever since the MCU started, a lot of movie studios have always they've been trying to mimic the MCU in some way, shape, or form, doing their own cinematic universes and stuff to varying degrees of success. We're clearly seeing it right now with the DC movies where, Zack Snyder was trying to do the same thing and then it didn't necessarily work out. And WB is still trying to figure out their DC universe and they're leaning heavily on the multiverse, but then we don't know the state of it's a mess over there, but it's it's been kind of sort of turning around for in a good way, but that's besides the point. Sony has is pretty much in a very weird situation, particularly when it comes to Spider-Man. But I guess I'm getting to my point is ever since Venom and its sequel, uh this Sony cinematic universe has been very just eh. And Morbius is another in a long line of very, I'm just gonna be honest, quick cash grabs. Morbius has the sensibilities of the early 2000s comic book films. In fact, if Morbius came out during that time period when we were getting Blade, the first couple of Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, the Tim Story Fantastic Four films, the Thomas Jane Punisher during that little era, it would fit perfectly within that. The quality definitely would have been still the same, but I think in that era where we were getting those films, it would have worked out better because if you remember, when we were getting comic book movies during that period of time, there was no cinematic universe, there was no thought of it, there was no thought of tying in all these movies together in any way. It was just studios putting out these movies and whatever money they make, they made, and that was that. Obviously, the ones that got franchises, whether it was the Sam Raimi Spider-Man's getting a trilogy, Blade getting a trilogy, Fantastic Four getting two movies, the X-Men getting a trilogy and plus a spin-off with Logan, the X-Men Origins, but that's pretty much after the fact. But the point is, Daredevil getting a spin-off, Elektra getting a spinning off of Daredevil. The point is, like, movie studios were just putting out these movies, and we as fans were just, I guess you could say, we embraced it because we were just happy to see these characters getting put on film in some way, shape, or form. Quality be damned. I'm one of those people that when Nicolas Cage did his Ghost Rider movie, I enjoyed it, but then I look back on it, it did not hold up, especially when we're coming in a post MCU and the quality has definitely shifted for the best. So when I'm seeing what Sony is doing with both Venom movies and now Morbius, it definitely is just nothing but quick cash grab. And and especially in the case of Morbius, there's no meat in this movie to keep you engaged. In fact, Morbius is a movie that had potential within the first 15 minutes in terms of its premise, but then it just falls flat once Michael Morbius becomes Morbius proper. It just becomes a very dull experience. And it really just comes down to the sum of the movie's parts of what you have. Like Jared Leto does fine as Michael Morbius. You know, we we're very he's very interesting playing this character. In fact, this is probably Jared Leto's more tame, his probably his most tamest role, especially in compared to him playing the Joker in Suicide Squad and BVS, the Snyder Cut and stuff. It's he's engaging enough as Morbius. He's fine. I didn't have an issue per se with him. Uh, there's not much in the way of character with him. It's a very just cut and dry. He's a scientist who is suffering from a blood disease and he's trying to cure it. We've seen these type of films before. And once he becomes Morbius, you would think the movie would pick up because he's the vampire, but it doesn't. But on the flip side, you got Matt Smith playing Milo Morbius, who it's weird because he's actually playing a character from the Morbius world, Loxias Crown. Now, what's interesting about this film is that all the characters in all the characters in this movie are based off of comic book characters that have ties to Morbius. Milo Morbius basically being lost his crown. He's basically much like Morbius. He's a pretty much a vampire. Um Adrian Orjana plays Martine Bancroft. She's another character has ties to Morbius and is his girlfriend, just like in the comics. You got Tyrese playing Simon Stroud, again, a character that is in the comic books, but much like his partner Alberto Rodriguez, played by Al Madrigal, both of these two, they bring nothing to the table. They just come across as very generic cops, and there's nothing interesting about them. They just exist to be cops that are hunting down Morbius. Um, and I think that just defines what the movie is. It's a very dull experience. There are moments where it's interesting. Like I said, when we get Morbius proper with the powers and stuff, there's some interesting things they do with it. And particularly Matt Smith, when he becomes a vampire too, just like Morbius, he is actually having fun being this vampire that's killing people and all that. And yet that's really the highlight is Matt Smith's, character. But again, the action and all that stuff, it's not engaging. Again, there's something there, but it doesn't stick the landing. And that's in a nutshell the problem. It's a very boring experience. And not boring in like I saw a lot of people point out the fact that Eternals was a boring movie. And Eternals was a different type of movie in that the stuff that was quote unquote boring, it was pretty much like story driven stuff that move the story forward, and it's either you're in or out. With Morbius, the boring stuff are things that just doesn't catch your interest. Like you're not at no point in time are you interested in what happens to Morbius. His plight of trying to, beat his vampire and, you know, he's trying not to give in to bloodlust, and they pull this whole plot point of him making organic blood that's like blue instead of red. That's their workaround of not making this movie gory in any kind. And I don't even think the movie being R-rated would have helped the film. But I will give the film props in the fact that them skirting around all the violence because of the synthetic blood and how they jump cut some of the kills circumvents it being bloody like it could be. Um, and also its half-ass ties to this world that it's in is another issue. If you remember in the promotion for Morbius, there was a lot of things that were tied into Spider-Man. There were posters of Spider-Man being a quote unquote killer on one of the posters, the Daily Bugle, the ties into Venom and stuff. And there was this whole logic that Morbius was tied into the Tom Holland Spider-Man. Another big glaring issue about this film is that it's edited to hell, and you can definitely tell they took out a lot of material that had ties to Spider-Man. More so much so that when you get to the post credits scenes, which I'll get to in a minute, you can tell they slapped it together, and it makes no sense within the spectrum of anything. It's like the writers didn't even pay attention to Spider-Man No Way Home, and they just did it because of reasons. And that's another issue is that even if you strip any connections to Spider-Man and take that off the table and take the post credits scenes off the table and just look at the movie as a standalone film, it doesn't work even as a standalone film because it has nothing there to keep you engaged to want to see more from this character in this world. And then even when you throw in some of the Spider-Man and Venom references, it still doesn't make you care anything for the story, the characters, and none of them. It's just it exists and that's it. There's nothing getting you excited. Which is interesting because when I look at the two Venom films, there was at least something to keep you engaged, despite how just flawed as fuck those two movies were. There was at least something there to keep you engaged, particularly with the sequel with Carnage. There was something there to keep you engaged. This movie doesn't have it. Now, spoilers. If you don't want to listen to this part, don't have to, but I'm just putting it in anyway because I don't care. The post-credit scenes make zero sense. Michael Keaton is playing Adrian Toomes from the MCU Spider-Man Homecoming. Now it makes zero sense because if you remember, oh, let me stop for a second. Both post-credit scenes at the end of the day make zero sense. We're supposed to believe that Doctor Strange's spell from Spider-Man No Way Home transported Adrian Toomes to the Morbius universe, which makes no sense because in No Way Home, in fact, the spell brought people to the MCU universe, not the other way around. Which, okay, why would you? Okay, clearly Sony feels as though magic is the reason why we get Adrian Toomes. It's very fucking half-assed as shit how they do it, and it makes zero sense. But then it's this idea that Adrian Toomes reaches out to Morbius to help him hunt down Spider-Man since he assumes Spider-Man is responsible for what happened. Okay, but again, it makes sense. Now, visually, it looks like Adrian Toomes has these wings from the Osborn thing from Amazing Spider-Man 2, which makes me believe that I'm theorizing here, so don't take it as a grain of salt. But it looks as though this takes place, I guess, in the Amazing Spider-Man movie world, I guess. I don't know. The point is, these post-credit scenes make zero sense. And it's not even a good kind of fan service that you can get excited for. It's like the worst possible fan service and not even done correctly. It looks nice, but it does nothing. And I think that's what is ultimately sad about Morbius because and unfortunate in a way because there is a way to do a movie about Morbius that could have been very standalone and interesting, and we just didn't get it. The pieces were there, but it's just the movie didn't know how to really just bring it on home, and that's the unfortunate part. And it really just shows where Sony is at in terms of how they're going about these films. They're just slapping them together for a quick buck. It feels like there's no effort, and I don't want to say the director didn't necessarily put any effort behind it. It's a possibility that he did, but just in terms of the writing and how everything comes together, it just feels like they just slapped it together to say, hey, we did a movie called Morbius because we got this license for the Spider-Man character, so we got to do movies about this. And it really, at the end of the day, doesn't make me excited for this Craven the Hunter movie they're doing. I mean, I was never excited in the first place because why would you do a movie about Craven the Hunter? It makes no sense. But it doesn't bode well for the Craven the Hunter movie. You know, it doesn't. And I think that's pretty much what we're going to be getting from Sony going forward. Just, other than Into the Spider-Verse sequel that's coming out, which looks to be really good, it's hard for me to really be excited for a lot of these solo films. And it just, I hate to say it, I feel Sony at some point is going to have to sit there and just let Marvel Studios just take over the Spider-Man license and just let them do what they can do to make all this work. Because ultimately, when I mentioned the fact that Morbius looks like it could take place in early 2000s, it reminds me of an ending from the first Wesley Snipes Blade movie where the ending for that, one of the endings that they had, which you can find on YouTube, was that after Blade defeats Deacon Frost, it shows Morbius on top of a building and Blade was about ready to face off against him before it cuts the credits. And that really tells you all you need to know in the fact that Morbius is a character plays well when you bounce him off other characters, particularly Blade and Spider-Man. Those are 2 characters that are good anchors for him to create a good narrative, and when you don't have those anchors there, you're not gonna get a good product. And again, is there a way to do a Morbius movie that would have been good? Yeah, but you have to really take the time out to craft a really engaging narrative, and that's not there. You have to do a good job of past crafting a good narrative, make me care about these characters, and unfortunately, I don't care about none of the characters. There's not even one character I care about in this film. I mean, when I look at something like, say, Eternals, there's at least a couple of characters I care about that I want to see what happens. And that's the thing too about Morbius. There's no characters you care about. They exist, they're there, and then that's it. So um I don't know if I can necessarily recommend Morbius. I will just say I would wait till it hits cable and then check it out, but otherwise I would not waste the money to go see this movie. Yeah, if I had to give it a score, I would say probably I would say a easy like 1 out of 5. Like it's just not good at all. Don't waste your money. Just wait till it hits cable. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Morbius and yeah, peace.